Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Jason Bent, and this week I'm going to share the refinish project that we did on our kitchen while we were still living in Georgia. The reason we decided to do this project is that we weren't really big fans of the raised panel doors, and we were selling the house, so we wanted to freshen it up with a nice new coat of paint. So for the most part, we ended up just replacing all of the doors with some shaker style doors and all of the drawer fronts, and then repainted all the exterior portions of the cabinets. And to start this project off, I took measurements of all the openings as well as the actual doors themselves because I was going to be using all of the existing hardware and not everything was the same, so I wanted to make sure that I did an exact match with each door. Once I got all the measurements, I went out to the shop and started to create a cut list and also a marking system for the doors. After that was complete, I actually went back into the house and started marking all of my doors with the list that I came up with and removed each one of the doors. Since I had my material list and I knew all of the materials I needed to get, I went to the store and grabbed a bunch of poplar as well as some 1/4-inch MDF, and that would be the construction that I'm using primarily on the doors. Since all the poplar that I purchased was all nice and flat, I just jointed one edge and then took it over to the miter saw and started cutting all of the panels so I would be able to then rip those panels down into my stiles and rails. And that was just a long, tedious process of repetitively cutting a bunch of stiles and rails at the table saw. After I was done cutting all of those, I then moved back over to my assembly table where I actually laid everything out by door. I wanted to make sure to keep everything together during this process because it would make the assembly a lot smoother. To cut the joinery for the doors, I decided to use my router table, and I also used one of these tongue and groove bit sets, which if you have a lot of doors to make, I cannot recommend a tongue and groove bit set enough. Yes, there are other ways to do it, but this really does expedite the process dramatically. I wanted to start off by doing some test pieces, so the first thing that I did was cut the groove, and then I used that piece to set the second bit to cut the tongue portion. Once I had those cut, I then took the two scrap pieces and did a quick little test fit, and as you can see, it was a nice, perfect fit. Now that I had tested everything and I knew that everything was set up the way it needed to be, I went ahead and started making all of my cuts until I had all of my stiles and rails cut and ready to be assembled. Since the stiles and rails were complete, it was time to go ahead and start breaking down the 1/4-inch MDF that I would be using for this project. And once I cut it down, I did a quick test just to make sure that everything fit perfectly, and it did. After I knew it was a nice tight fit, I then moved over to the miter saw and started cross-cutting all of my panels to get them to the exact size. From there, I moved back over to my assembly table and started doing a quick dry fit of each one of the doors just to make sure that everything lined up just right. After I was satisfied with the dry fit, I then marked each one of the doors so I wouldn't get them confused during the assembly process. For the assembly, it was pretty straightforward, and I just did the same thing with each door, and that was just apply some glue to each one of the tongues and insert them into the grooves, and then slide the panel in, and from there, complete the assembly of the door. To clamp each one of the doors, I just used one clamp at the top, one clamp at the bottom, and just applied slight pressure just to ensure I saw a little bit of glue squeeze out. And after I clamped each one up, I checked each door just to make sure that it was nice and square. The next day I came out into the shop, unclamped each one of the doors, and started a big stack because I had lots of sanding to do. To sand each one of the doors, I actually used a drum sander and purchased this drum sander specifically for this project. As I started to do it by hand, I just realized a drum sander would have finally been a nice addition to the shop. Once the sanding was complete on each door, I then took it over to the drill press so I could make repeatable cuts for the hinge hole locations on each one of the doors. You definitely do not need to have a drill press to do this. There are many really nice jigs out on the market. However, this just made it very quick, easy, and repeatable. And just to make sure I had my depth setting correct, I did a quick test just to make sure that the hinge fits. One last step prior to me getting started on the finish work, and that was just taking one of these sanding sponges and just doing 2 to 3 passes on each edge. And the reason I like to do that is just to take off that sharp edge that is created from doing your cuts on the table saw. As I stated in the beginning of the video, we decided to reuse all of the same hinges. And since they didn't match, I did have to make sure that I matched those hinges up to the new doors. So here I'm just going door by door, taking off the hinges and then putting them on the new doors. And to attach each set of hinges, I just used a square to make sure that everything stayed square, and drill a pilot hole with a self-centering drill bit, and then screw the hinges in place. Just to make sure that I did everything right, I wanted to go ahead and mount the doors and go ahead and pre-drill for all of the new door hardware that we were going to be using for this project, and I'm really glad that I did this step. Once I knew everything was good with the doors, I then went ahead and took all the doors off again, took them all out into the garage, and started the finish process. And the finish that I used on our cabinets was Sherwin-Williams Chem Aqua Pigmented Lacquer. I started off by spraying 2 coats of their primer with sanding in between, and then finished it off with 3 coats of the actual lacquer itself. And after all of that, this was the result. The next step was to sand all of the cabinet face frames and sides of the cabinets that would receive paint. Once that was complete, I went ahead and moved on to taping everything off, and for this project, I actually left the majority of the stuff inside of the cabinets because of this technique to tape off each one of the openings. This is not a technique that I came up with by any means. I think I saw the Idaho painter do it, and he is just a genius when it comes to all things painting, but I'm very glad that I found this method. Because I would actually lay a tarp down, I wanted to make sure that I got my kitchen island moved out of the way before proceeding with any more of the tape. Once all the cabinets were taped off, I went ahead and moved to the floor, and these 3M sheets come in really, really handy during this process. The only thing that was left to do was actually paint the cabinets, and I sprayed everything in the house, and I'm really glad that I took the time to mask everything off, and I wasn't really concerned with any kind of overspray, just because I had taken the time to dial in the settings on the gun to ensure that there wasn't a lot of overspray, and as you can see in this video, it's almost non-existent. For this process, I actually opened up the garage door and another window just to make sure I had some good cross ventilation, and I actually taped off a wall leading into the living room just to make sure that everything was contained in this room, and I had really no issues. After all the coats were complete, it was time to go ahead and start ripping off all of the plastic that I took so long to install, but this is always a fun part of the process because it gives you an opportunity to start to see the finished project. And it was really great because my wife and son had come home just as I was doing this. So after I got everything cleaned up, I reinstalled all of the doors, and this is where I actually went and installed the drawer fronts because this is the first time that I had done anything with the drawer fronts. I didn't mock them up prior to, so I just had a few drawer fronts to quickly install and install the hardware on the last pieces, and it was done. And here's a quick before picture and after picture, kind of just comparing the two. And as you can see from the photos, we also decided to remove the fan and put in a better light, but we could not have been happier with the end result of this kitchen. It made such a drastic difference, and we really like the style of the shaker door as opposed to the raised panel door. That's going to do it for this video, everybody. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch. I hope you found it helpful, and until next time, get out in the shop, try something new, and I'll see you in the next video.